The Whisper in the Woods. Summer has always been my favorite season, but after what happened that fateful June night, I'll never look at those long, warm evenings the same way again. I was 17 that summer, on the cusp of adulthood but still clinging to the last vestiges of childhood freedom. My two best friends, Chuck and Jackson, had convinced me to go on an illicit camping trip in the sprawling nature preserve near my house. At nearly 1,000 acres, it was a vast expanse of untamed wilderness, the perfect backdrop for teenage rebellion. As dusk fell, we piled into Jackson's beat-up Corolla, the trunk stuffed with camping gear and beer. The car groaned under the weight as we bounced down the rutted dirt road leading into the preserve. Technically, overnight camping was strictly forbidden, but we figured the odds of getting caught were slim to none if we hiked deep enough into the woods. Chuck was our self-appointed wilderness expert, armed with an arsenal of Boy Scout knowledge and an industrial-grade flashlight that could probably be seen from space. Jackson was, as always, in charge of provisions, namely, enough alcohol to ensure we'd all have pounding headaches come morning. As for me, I was just along for the ride, eager for adventure but blissfully unaware of the horrors that awaited us in those dark woods. The gentle summer breeze carried the heady scent of pine as we trudged along the overgrown trail, swatting at mosquitoes and taking generous swigs from our water bottles, which may or may not have been spiked with vodka. After about 30 minutes of hiking, we came upon a small clearing that seemed as good a spot as any to make camp. Chuck immediately sprang into action, barking orders as we fumbled to set up the tent in the fading twilight. Jackson and I exchanged bemused glances. Chuck's gung-ho enthusiasm for all things outdoorsy never failed to amuse us. But we had to admit, his expertise came in handy as he got a crackling fire going in no time. As night fell in earnest, we settled into our camp chairs around the fire, cracking open beers and falling into easy conversation. The flickering flames cast dancing shadows across our faces as we swapped stories and jokes. In that moment, everything felt perfect. Just three friends enjoying a warm summer night under a canopy of stars. But as the hours wore on and the beer flowed freely, an undercurrent of unease began to creep in. Maybe it was the eerie stillness of the forest or the way the shadows seemed to writhe and twist just beyond the fire's glow. Whatever the cause, I found myself glancing nervously over my shoulder, unable to shake the feeling that we were being watched. It was nearing 2 a.m. when Jackson turned down the music on his portable speaker, reaching for another beer. In the sudden quiet, we all froze as an ear-splitting whistle pierced the night. It was unnaturally loud yet seemed to come from far away, echoing through the trees in a way that made my skin crawl. We exchanged wide-eyed looks of alarm, sobering up instantly. Chuck quickly doused the fire, plunging us into darkness broken only by the feeble glow of his flashlight. We huddled close together, straining our ears for any sign of approach. But the woods had gone deathly silent, no crickets chirping, no leaves rustling. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath. What the hell was that? Jackson whispered, his voice tight with fear. I don't know, Chuck replied grimly. But I think we should pack up and get out of here. I nodded in agreement, my heart thundering in my chest. But as we started gathering our belongings, a blood-curdling scream rent the air. It sounded human, yet there was an otherworldly quality to it that chilled me to my core. Before we could react, the beam of Chuck's flashlight caught a flash of movement in the underbrush. Something was circling our campsite, just beyond the reach of the light. I caught glimpses of pale, elongated limbs and glowing red eyes that blinked in and out of existence. Panic seized us and we bolted, abandoning our gear as we crashed through the woods. Branches whipped at our faces and roots seemed to reach up to trip us, but we ran on, spurred by pure animal terror. The thing pursued us, always just out of sight but drawing ever closer. Its rasping breath echoed in my ears as I pumped my legs harder, desperate to escape. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, we burst out of the tree line and into the parking lot where we'd left the car. We piled in, fumbling with trembling hands to get the key in the ignition. As Jackson gunned the engine and peeled out onto the road, I dared to look back. A tall, emaciated figure stood at the edge of the woods, its elongated arms ending in razor-sharp claws. But it was the face that would haunt my nightmares for years to come, a twisted, eyeless visage with a gaping maw filled with needle-like teeth. As we sped away, its unearthly shriek followed us into the night. We drove in shell-shocked silence, each lost in our own thoughts. None of us wanted to discuss what we'd seen or theorize about what it could have been. Some horrors are better left unexamined. When we finally reached town, the first pale light of dawn was creeping over the horizon. Jackson dropped us off without a word, and I stumbled into my house in a daze. I collapsed into bed, praying that sleep would erase the terrors of the night. But my ordeal was far from over. That camping trip was just the beginning. The night something ancient and evil awoke in those woods, fixing its malevolent gaze upon us. In the weeks and months that followed, our lives would be consumed by a waking nightmare as that thing pursued us relentlessly. It started small at first, fleeting glimpses of a shadowy figure lurking at the edge of my vision, gone when I turned to look. Objects in my room would be slightly out of place, as if someone had been rifling through my belongings. I'd wake in the middle of the night, heart racing, with the unshakable feeling that something had been looming over my bed, watching me sleep. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, just lingering trauma from that night in the woods. But deep down, I knew the truth. That thing had followed us home, and it wasn't going to let us go. The Watcher in the Park. Summer used to be my favorite season, a time of freedom and endless possibilities. But now, the long days and warm nights only fill me with dread, a constant reminder of the nightmare that began on one sweltering evening last June. I was 24, living with my parents and working a dead-end construction job to help support the household. Life wasn't easy, but I found solace in fitness, using my nightly workouts at the local park as an escape from the stress and arguments at home. The park was about a 10-minute drive from my house, perched on top of a hill overlooking the city. It had a small outdoor gym with bars for pull-ups and other calisthenics exercises. I loved going there at night when it was empty, the peaceful atmosphere a welcome contrast to the chaos of my daily life. On that fateful night, I slipped out of the house while my parents were in the midst of another heated argument. The air was thick and humid as I climbed into my beat-up Corolla, the engine sputtering to life reluctantly. As I drove, I rolled down the windows, letting the warm breeze tousle my hair. When I arrived at the park, the lot was empty as usual. It was close to 11 p.m., and the park was shrouded in shadows, illuminated only by a few scattered streetlights. The city sprawled out below, a sea of twinkling lights that always filled me with a bittersweet sense of longing. I started my workout as usual, losing myself in the rhythm of pull-ups and dips. I wasn't counting reps, just pushing myself to exhaustion, letting the physical strain drown out the worries that constantly plagued my mind. It was between sets, as I paused to catch my breath, that I first felt it, an indescribable sensation that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Some primal instinct screamed at me to run, but before I could move, a voice spoke from directly behind me. "You've got good form." I whirled around, my heart leaping into my throat. Standing less than a foot away was a tall, gaunt man I'd never seen before. His sudden appearance was startling enough, but it was his appearance that truly unsettled me. His skin was pale and waxy, stretched too tight over sharp cheekbones. His eyes were sunken and feverishly bright, darting around constantly as if searching for something only he could see. I stammered out a response, asking what he was doing there. He let out a raspy chuckle that sent chills down my spine. "I live here," he said, gesturing vaguely at the surrounding park. "I see you here all the time. Think you could teach me some of those moves?" Alarm bells were ringing in my head, but I've never been good at confrontation. I mumbled something about finishing my workout and tried to turn away, but he stepped closer, invading my personal space. "What's your hurry?" he asked, his tone light but with an undercurrent of something that made my skin crawl. "We've got all night." I forced myself to remain calm, explaining that I needed to get home. As I spoke, I edged towards my car, keeping my eyes on the strange man. He watched me go with an unsettling smile, not moving from his spot by the pull-up bars. Just as I thought I was in the clear, he called out to me. But it wasn't what he said that stopped me in my tracks, it was how he said it. He used my full name, a name I was certain I'd never told him. I froze, slowly turning back to face him. "What did you say?" His grin widened, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too numerous. "You heard me," he said softly. "I know all about you. I've been watching for a long time." Terror gripped me, and I bolted for my car, fumbling with the keys as I heard his rasping laughter behind me. I peeled out of the parking lot, my hands shaking so badly I could barely keep the wheel straight. The entire drive home, I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see that pale, grinning face looming in the backseat. When I finally made it home, I locked myself in my room, too shaken to even explain to my concerned parents what had happened. I tried to convince myself it was just a random encounter with a disturbed individual, that the use of my name was a coincidence or a trick of my imagination. But deep down, I knew better. Something had marked me that night, and my life would never be the same. The next morning, I woke early for work, groggy from a night of fitful sleep plagued by nightmares. As I stepped outside to leave, something on the front porch caught my eye. A plain white envelope with my name scrawled across it in spidery handwriting. My blood ran cold as I picked it up, already knowing who it was from. With trembling hands, I tore it open, dreading what I might find inside. What I saw made my knees buckle, and I had to grab the porch railing to keep from collapsing. Inside were a dozen photographs of me. Some were taken at work, others at the park during my nightly workouts. But the ones that truly terrified me were the photos taken through the window of my bedroom, showing me sleeping peacefully, unaware of the malevolent presence watching from the darkness outside. I went to the police, but they were frustratingly unhelpful. Without concrete evidence of a crime, there was little they could do beyond taking a report and promising to keep an eye out. I felt utterly alone, constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at every shadow. The stalking continued, growing bolder with each passing day. I'd find notes left on my car, always in that same spidery handwriting. Sometimes they contained crude drawings or more photos. Other times, they were simply my name, repeated over and over until it filled the entire page. I stopped going to the park, but it didn't matter. He always seemed to know where I was, what I was doing. I'd catch glimpses of him everywhere, standing on a street corner as I drove to work, lurking in the shadows of the construction site, peering in through windows at night. My parents grew increasingly worried as I became a shell of my former self, too paranoid and exhausted to do much beyond work and hide in my room. They started talking about moving, but I knew it wouldn't matter. Whatever this thing was, it would follow me wherever I went. As summer wears on, I find myself longing for the colder months, for the long nights and gloomy days that might offer some respite from this constant, oppressive fear. But even as I write this, I can feel eyes on me, watching from somewhere in the darkness beyond my window. And I know that no matter where I go or what I do, I'll never truly be safe again. The Watcher has marked me, and it will never let me go. The uninvited guest. Summer parties were never really my thing. At 22, I was more content to stay home with a good book or video game than to socialize with strangers. But when my friend Philip invited me to a house party one balmy Saturday night in July, I reluctantly agreed. Little did I know that this ordinary summer night would turn into a nightmare that would haunt me for years to come. The party was at a stranger's house, some guy named Randy who Philip apparently knew from work. I wasn't thrilled about the idea of going to a party where I didn't know anyone, but Philip assured me it would be fun. Plus, he pointed out, it beat sitting alone in my room on a Saturday night. We agreed to drive separately since Philip lived in the opposite direction. As I pulled up to the address he'd given me, I felt a knot of anxiety forming in my stomach. The house was huge, far bigger than I'd expected, and I could hear the thump of bass even from the street. Just as I was steeling myself to go in, my phone buzzed with a text from Philip. My heart sank as I read it. He was bailing on me, claiming a last-minute emergency. For a moment, I seriously considered just driving home. But something made me stay. Maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe it was fate. Whatever the reason, I found myself walking up to the front door and ringing the bell. The host, Randy, answered with a warm smile that immediately put me at ease. He was charismatic and friendly, quickly introducing me around as if we'd known each other for years. To my surprise, I found myself actually enjoying the party. The alcohol flowed freely, the music was good, and people were far friendlier than I'd anticipated. As the night wore on, however, I started to feel the effects of too much drinking. The room was spinning, and I desperately needed some air and a quiet place to collect myself. I stumbled upstairs, looking for a bathroom, but they were all occupied. In my drunken state, I found myself wandering through the maze-like hallways of the upper floors. Eventually, I came across a door that led to what looked like an attic or storage room. Desperate for some privacy, I slipped inside, fumbling in the darkness for a light switch. Finding none, I made my way to a window in the far corner, throwing it open and gratefully gulping in the cool night air. As I leaned out the window, trying to quell my nausea, a flicker of movement on the roof caught my eye. At first, I thought it must be a trick of the light or my alcohol-addled imagination. But as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized with dawning horror that I was seeing two figures moving stealthily across the slanted roof tiles. They were dressed all in black, faces obscured by ski masks, and each carried a bulging duffel bag. With a jolt of adrenaline that cut through my drunken haze, I realized I was witnessing a robbery in progress. For a moment, I was paralyzed with indecision. Should I yell for help? Try to stop them myself? What if they were armed? Before I could decide on a course of action, my foot slipped on the smooth wooden floor, sending me stumbling into a stack of boxes with a resounding crash. The noise alerted the burglars, and two pairs of eyes snapped in my direction. For a heartbeat, we stared at each other in mutual shock. Then, with a muffled curse, they began scrambling towards me. Panic surged through me, sobering me up instantly. I turned to flee, but in my haste, I tripped over my own feet and went sprawling. My phone clattered to the floor, skidding across the smooth wood and coming to rest near the open window. As I scrambled to my feet, I heard the burglars clambering through the window behind me. In a desperate move, I lunged for my phone, managing to snatch it up just as a rough hand grabbed the back of my shirt. "Who the fuck are you?" a harsh voice growled.